Welcome everyone to this latest of the Tour de Fabric live events. We've got a wonderful panel here with us today to discuss the topic of quilt judging. So we've got all sorts of different perspectives to hear from. I'm not going to try and introduce the whole panel myself, though. I'm going to let them do that. So the order they are in my screen is Andrea, Claudia, Cole. So do you want to just say a few words to introduce yourselves in that order? Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Bee. This has been a wonderful event, and I am the owner of True Blue Quilts, which is a pattern design and educational type online experience. You can find me at my website, True Blue Quilts, and also on YouTube, where I share my perspectives, current projects, all that kind of good stuff. Um, and I'm just really excited to be here and happy to share my thoughts on quilt shows and the judging process.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And Claudia, over to you.
Hi, I'm coming from San Francisco, and been a quilt maker for about 20 years, and for about the last 10 years, I have focused on making wall quilts or display quilts. They're mainly for quilt shows, so I'm looking forward to sharing my perspective. And also, the types of quilts I make tend to be modern and improv, and use a lot of my own hand-dyed fabric. And I have recently started teaching, and it's been super exciting, mostly improv techniques. And you can find my work at claudiashearquilts.com, and also same name on Instagram.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Cole.
Hi, I'm Cole. I'm really excited to be here. I have only been really into quilting just for a few years now, although I did learn as a child. I am a quilt pattern designer and an educator. I also am a long armor, and my website is colesquilts.com or colesquiltsacademy.com for my classes.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much. And I know before this session, we were having a little discussion about where quilt judging has come from. And I think, Claudia, you were telling us about the kind of origins of judging and why it's important.
Well, I'm by no means any expert, but I was always a little curious of why there is such an emphasis on competition. If you do go to a quilt show, it's hard to ignore. And so I think, quilts have been in the realm of craft versus art, and therefore it has had a tradition of being judged, like at the state fair. And that's kind of where it comes from. I find that it really is evolving now, but there is an emphasis on technique, and maybe not so much on, the artistry of your quilt, but more on more tangible ways of the judging really emphasizes tangibles.
Yeah, and I can certainly say that the one of the things that the judges try not to judge on is it is in a way the artistry, because they're not trying to remake your quilt for you. And if you've chosen to use a particular design or a particular section of fabrics or a particular theme, then that's your choice, and that's not to be criticized at all from that perspective. Although, of course, that can be difficult with art quilts. So I think we've all had quilts judged before. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your experiences of that? Maybe Andrea, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'm actually sharing the quilt behind me is my most recent entry. It in my local show, I tend to enter the Arizona Quilters Guild annual show in my local area. I have submitted several times to QuiltCon at the national level, and that's a little bit different process because there is a panel of jurists that approve quilts to be shown at QuiltCon even before the judging process starts. The local show, you just sign up and send your quilt in. So it's a little bit easier there to dip your toes in the water of the judging process. Um, and I don't necessarily shy away from having critiques of my work. I go through the design process. If I'm happy with the way the quilt turned out, then I'm happy to share it and welcome feedback. I do try to, mentally prepare, kind of put up that Teflon shield and say, this is one person's opinion. I know all the flaws in my own quilt before I submit it. So I think that's important to keep in mind that, you know, even if people are critiquing the technique, you should know, if you're submitting something where the points don't all meet, then you should expect to have judges point out that your points don't all meet. So, you can't go in all starry-eyed and thinking this is the greatest thing ever and everything is perfect, because they're always going to find those things. So if you can keep in mind that you know where the flaws are, and then be open to some critique on where you can improve your techniques, I think that's the best mindset to go into a judging situation.
I think you're absolutely right. Cole, what about you? What's been your experience of quilt judging?
The first time I did anything, I submitted a quilt to my local fair, and it was like, you just anyone can bring one in. There was no charge for it, and that was a really positive experience for me. And so I heard about QuiltCon, and I thought, I'm gonna design a quilt for QuiltCon. I'm gonna look at what they're looking for. I'm gonna plan for. I'm gonna make, because I was like, they like unique things. I'm gonna make something unique. And so I made this quilt for QuiltCon, and I finished it way earlier than the submissions for QuiltCon. So I was kind of like, well, what other quilt shows are there? So I submitted it for the International Quilt Festival Long Beach, and it got in, and I was like, cool. And then one morning I wake up to a phone call of them telling me it got best of show. And I
Whoa.
was floored.
And this was
Floored.
the second time you'd ever had a quilt judged.
Second time I'd ever had a quilt judged. And I did end up sending it to QuiltCon, and it got second place in piecing.
Mate.
So but I think the difference is interesting. So the judging of my quilt at the local level
Mm.
was more harsh. So
Wow.
like I remember them saying it was this foundation paper piecing picture of Mount Rainier, mountains and trees, and I purposefully quilted it less in the mountain because I wanted the mountain to sort of come out. And the judges were like, your quilting isn't consistent.
Mm.
I thought, well, that was a design decision, but okay. My other quilt that got best of show, I actually accidentally ripped part of it and did some quick turn needle applique business to cover it up. Not well, mind you. And when I sent it in, I thought, oh, well, they're not going to like that. But then it won and they didn't say anything about it. So I think that has a lot to do with the show you're sending it to and what they're looking for, because I feel like something like QuiltCon is looking more at the concept and the design, whereas my experience at the local fair is they're looking at the technique and the details.
That's really interesting. Claudia, I want to go more into this with you as well, but I know that you've entered national and local shows. So what's been your experience of having things judged?
I mean, mostly it's favorable. I mean, it's just a data point. That's kind of the way I approach it, because judges go out of their way not to say anything mean, at least in my experience. So they'll just say you could have done this better. And if it's couched in very, very nice words. And then, you have to put it into context. Like Cole said, as an artist, you make a decision on maybe how much quilting to put on a quilt, and then they might say, not enough quilting on the quilt, but that was a decision you actually made. And so, is it more important to, place and get a ribbon and follow all the quilting rules, or what you think a particular show, once you've had some quilts in a show and you kind of know how they're going to judge? I mean, is it important to you to get a ribbon, or do you need to make, express yourself and make the best quilt you can? And, so the second answer is kind of what I go for. But yeah, I mean, it's fairly favorable. I had this experience with a quilt that it wasn't QuiltCon. I've never gotten a ribbon at QuiltCon. It was my Purple Haze quilt. It was at PIQF and it won the best quilt in its category. I think it was best mid-mod wall quilt. Um, and it came with money and all this. I was kind of blown
Wow.
away. And unfortunately, I don't know what happened to the judge's notes.
Oh.
And then so on a whim, I put that very same quilt that won best quilt, and really you get a lot of attention. I'm sure Cole's got a lot more prestigious award, and probably he got a lot of attention, in good press and all that. So just on a whim, I put in our local show, and Alex, it was the one that we were co-chairs for a show together,
Right,
a
we
little
were.
local show after the pandemic, and I only make modern improv quilts, so I had all these quilts, they let you enter like 4 quilts. So I had 3 quilts in the modern, and just on a whim, I entered that quilt as a art quilt, and it got, I think, honorable mention, which just totally cracks me up at the local show. And the quilts that placed above mine were like stuff like someone cut fish out of a fish fabric and just like put it on some fabric. I mean, it was, because obviously the quilt was not in the category that it should have been, but I was kind of amused by that. But I
Yeah.
think like it's helped me, quilt shows have, and the feedback has helped me just slow down and just work on some finishing techniques and things that they just overly like focus on that you can easily correct. Um, and just like when I'm making quilts, I take the time to make sure they're pieced correctly and pressed correctly, and just take a little more time on the techniques. It's not going to take away from any artistic idea I have, just in case I want to enter that quilt in a show, and it's gonna do better, or it's just gonna look better in the show.
Hmm. Well, certainly, I know I also, when I was looking for my quilting judging notes, I also found my certificate. Oh, it's not going to show up. Look, this is my official quilt judge training certificate. This piece of slightly crumpled card from February this year, where I did my training. But certainly the way we were taught during that course was that you want to help the maker get closer to a ribbon or getting placed higher next time. And that was really interesting. But both Cole and Claudia, you both mentioned something which I think is really interesting, and that's about making for a show specifically and having the category in mind before you go into it. And I'd love to get everybody's viewpoint on this. But Andrea, have you done that yourself?
I did. And again, I don't have the national experience that Claudia and Cole do, but I did, you always want to push for that ribbon or, getting on the podium in a competition. So I kind of mentally surveyed the categories and thought, I probably have a better chance of entering the scrappy category because they had a standard of something like 75 fabrics in your quilt. And I planned a scrappy pinwheel quilt that had 90 some different fabrics that I collected. And I worked very hard on the custom quilting, trying to get the color play just right. And it was I think where I went wrong because I didn't win anything was that I did a scrappy wall hanging, but it wasn't like miniature. So a big bed quilt with over 100 fabrics, of course, is going to look more impressive in the scrappy category than a wall hanging that's, standard size blocks.
Mm.
So you kind of have to play the game, I guess, if you're shooting for that. But it is a little bit different mental perspective to start planning and say, okay, I really need to push myself to do the best, hardest thing that I can execute well to impress the judges versus, hey, I made this quilt and I'm really proud of how it turned out, so I think I'll show it off. There's just a little bit different mindset there.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And Cole, do you always enter with a specific category in mind? Like, do you always make for the show that you're entering?
No, that one quilt was the only one that I made for a show, and it was just because I don't know. I'd heard about QuiltCon, I looked it up, it sounded exciting to me, and I thought, And at the time, I was sort of ready for my next project. I really feel like for me, the most exciting part is coming up with an idea and then being able to see that idea happen. And so if it so happens that lines up with the show, great. And sometimes that will give you, so sometimes you can actually get more creative when you have more rules you have to follow. Otherwise, you get sort of overwhelmed by choices, right? So I think for some people, looking at a category and being like, okay, or when they have challenges in shows where they're like, use these three colors, right? That if that sparks your creativity and gets you excited, then you should do it. But I think that the big thing for people, because some people will say, well, should you even judge thing? We shouldn't focus so much on judging, or, people will post their like QuiltCon rejects on Instagram when everyone gets, the answers. And some people are like, oh, I can't believe that one didn't get in.
Mm.
I think it's really important to understand that like it's all opinion based. It's like, did the people judging that show happen to think that your quilt fit that category in that show at that time? It doesn't mean your quilt is good or bad or whatever. And so I think the attitude and how well you can deal with certain emotions is important, because for me, when I entered the quilt, I did make it for the show, but I kind of made it with a, oh, this would be fun to try attitude. And then I was just surprised that I won. I've entered some other quilts and shows, but it's been sort of like I was making it because I wanted to make it. And then when it was done, I was kind of like, is there a category it could fit in? Right.
Mm.
And so for me, it's sort of like a fun side thing. If you feel like if your quilt doesn't get in, that you're going to want to stop quilting or you're going to be so upset, you're probably not the person who should be putting quilts in shows. You know what I mean? Because to me, the
It's
whole
been
point
tried.
of quilting is the joy
Mm.
that you get out of it.
Yeah.
So you have to have that attitude of, oh, this is a fun learning experience. And when you get feedback, if it's not, all good feedback, you can be like, some people take that as, oh, that motivates me to keep going, and other people it'll crush them. So I feel like you sort of need to know yourself and what environment is good for you.
That's a good point. I guess it's not, I don't imagine there are many people that are quilters who do it for the money, or the
Oh
prize.
yeah.
Because I know that some of the shows have big prizes, like Paducah has some big cash going on. But yes, it is very much dependent. As Melinda was just writing in the chat, the pool of entrants determines the standard. And the judges do have the discretion in many shows to not award certain ribbons, if they don't feel that there is anything that fits the criteria or is worthy of a ribbon. But I should think that's pretty unusual. But this all also plays into something else that you've all mentioned, about the categories and the definitions of the categories. And it's so difficult sometimes to choose which category to go into if you've already made a quilt. Claudia, you mainly make beautiful modern quilts. Do you still have this category issue of like, where should I put this? Where should I go?
Well, it really depends on the show because
Mm.
the categories can be vastly different. QuiltCon can be difficult because I only make basically improvisational quilts.
Mhm.
Um, well, I mean, you just can't put all your quilts in the improv category. It's just kind of unrealistic. So you have to be kind of imaginative. And then QuiltCon, Monochrome has very generously shared a lot of their behind the scenes, how they judge, how they jury, all kinds of stuff. It's on their website. So if you're a member, you can look at the resources. So, but it does, when I look at categories, what resonates with me is that, I have a very distinct point of view that I've developed over maybe the last 10 years or 20 years of quilt making. I make certain kinds of quilts. And so I have to find the shows that will take my type of quilt because I'm not changing the way my overall aesthetic is not going to change. And it just so happens that QuiltCon got more flexible and, you know, you can use hand-dyed fabrics now and they're just, their tent, circus tent has gotten a lot bigger than when I first started. And so they're more inclusive, and just so happens that my aesthetic now kind of falls in within that. I still many times don't get a quilt in QuiltCon. And I just wanted to point out there is a distinction between having a quilt juried in and then judged. And the people that are curating, that are jurying pieces to put in a show are not the judges. And they're trying to build a show that has maybe a cohesive look or whatever. So
Right.
it's really a completely different process from like the judging process.
Yeah, I realize I don't really know anything about jurying a quilt show because it's not. I've never entered one that was juried, I don't know anything about that. Andrea, Cold, have either of you ever been part of a jury for a quilt show? No. Oh, okay. Well, if anyone listening has had experience of that, then do let us know. But yes, certainly just from the judging perspective, when a quilt does end up in the wrong category and someone has made the choice to put it in, some shows will allow quilts to be moved to a different category if the judges feel strongly. But other shows are adamant that it has to be judged in a particular category. And sometimes such a shame because you're kind of thinking to yourself, wow, if they'd only entered it in saying more modern or something instead of traditional and an applique, then it really would have done amazing. I know I am guilty of kind of category choosing, to hedging my bets with my categories. The last quilt show that San Francisco Quilt Girls had, I had a quilt that could have gone into like 3 or 4 different categories. And so I chose the one that I thought would have the least entries. And it turned out that pretty much everyone else entering the show that year had thought the same thing. And this was like the biggest category ended up being. But that's a bit cheeky, but only because it genuinely could have gone in so many different places. One of the things Claudia mentioned was about finding the shows to enter. So Cole, how do you go about finding these shows?
Honestly, I just do a lot of Googling. I remember at one point I did find a website and I wish I could remember it so I could give it to you guys. I'm sure I have it saved somewhere. But it just listed all the shows. I mean, probably not all the shows in the US, but it really had a lot of them. And they were like, if there are any more you guys know of, please like email us. And there were like links and stuff. So I've just done a little bit of Googling. I really feel like I still feel like I hear about other ones though. Like social media, I follow a lot of quilters and I'll see them post, oh, I'm at this show. And I'm like, oh, I haven't heard of that show. So I feel like you sort of collect that information over time too. And I will say, going back really quick to the categories thing has been difficult for me because I feel like the quilts that I make, there isn't really a category for them. I do like foundation piecing pictorial. So it's
Right.
like, well, it's not traditional, so I guess it's modern, but it's not like modern, like a red circle on a white quilt modern,
Right.
So it's like hit or miss whether or not it works out.
Absolutely. And Andrea, you're saying that you think the Craft Industry Alliance has a lot.
I'm taking a guess because it has been several years, but when Cole mentioned that, Googling and seeing a list, Craft Industry Alliance is a wonderful resource, not just for quilters, but for many different crafts. And they do maintain some database information. And so that's probably where I would start to look. But I would imagine that most guilds, at least if they're large enough, like Arizona has a statewide guild that they may put on shows. And so there may be some resources out there if people want to find their own state and neighboring areas to look for shows, and get your feet wet in the smaller areas. Although we have said that sometimes those are harder to get into than some of the national ones. But also, as you start looking, you will see the different show sponsors, like Road to California now has both California and Road to Virginia that have shows. And then I think as we were talking earlier, we mentioned the Mancuso company that sponsors several shows. And I'm blanking on who actually runs Houston International Quilt Festival. There's a Quilt Ink or something.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
Quilt Ink
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yes, and as Scarlett says in the chat that also quilt magazines often have lists of shows and show ads as well. I guess we're talking about like getting our quilts judged and saying that the smaller ones are often harder. And I think there's a psychological block because people know who you are and you know who they are, and it all becomes very personal all of a sudden. What prompted you though to first get quilt judged when you first did it, Claudia? What was your inspiration the first time? When was the first time?
I know you asked us earlier, and honestly, I don't know. Maybe 2014 is the only first photo on my camera roll. Um, you know, I quilting is mostly a solitary activity, at least when you're making the quilt. I do belong to a lot of quilt groups, collaborative groups, smaller offshoots of guilds and different art organizations. But when you're making a quilt, you're usually making it by yourself. I like putting it out there and sharing and being able to tell the stories about quilts. That's something I'm passionate about more so than um, the competitive nature of quilt shows. It just unfortunately kind of comes part and parcel, unless you want to get more into SAQA and the Studio Arts Quilts Association and more into the art world. You do have to deal with the competitive aspect, but I just honestly wanted feedback to help me improve what I was doing as
Mm,
well.
yeah, yeah. Cole, what about you?
Well, I live right by the fairgrounds for our one of our state fairs. I mean, so close that when they have something going on, I can hear it.
Wow.
Like I could walk there. It's like within a
It
So
smells
whenever the fair
wonderful.
would happen, there'd be lots of traffic and stuff. And so I just at one point when I was driving by, I thought, oh, they've got to have a competition for quilts because they have everything. They have like jam competition, they have animal, they have all sorts of stuff. And so I just looked it up and thought, I'm just gonna try it because I don't just to see what happens. And it was so much fun. I would say I loved that I got the comments back from the judge, but more than that, I loved going to the fair once that was hung up
Mm.
and seeing some of the people working the fair being like, "Oh, you did this? We love this."
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, Melinda again in the chat is saying that it's great for quilters to exhibit regardless of the judging. And
Yeah.
often they're completely separate things. You can opt whether to have things judged or not. And I know I've definitely done that where there was something that I knew would be criticized for X, Y, Z. And I was just like, I'm just going to save myself from that feedback and just elect not to have that thing judged. Andrea, what about you? When did you first have something judged? And
Oh goodness. I am not shy, so I think I bought my long arm in 2006, and like 6 or 8 months later, I finished a small project and entered it in my local show. And that is my claim to fame as an award-winning quilter because I won Rookie of the Year.
hey, that's a good award
So
actually to have. Yeah.
yeah. So talk about being the big fish in a very small pond for that category. So yeah, and I know that's, like I said, it could be good, could be one of my fatal flaws is barging ahead and not considering the consequences until later. But yeah, I haven't ever shied away from putting things on display. So
No. I think my first time, I think it was the 2017 San Francisco show, because we tend to alternate years with Oakland across the water, or East Bay, I should say.
mm,
And yes, that was my first experience. And I've actually got a photo of that quilt in the deck, which I know a number of us have added photos in there, which I want to get to in a moment. But I was what motivated me to get it judged was simply because I have never entered anything into a quilt show before, and the judging was available, and I was kind of like, whoa, why not? And you know, it's useful to have that feedback. And would you say that your quilting has changed as a result of judges' feedback? Cole, what about you?
Um, yes and no. I
Okay,
mean,
all right.
yes, because I will now as I'm making something, I'll be thinking to myself, I wonder what they're gonna think about that.
Mm,
So I feel like I'm more aware of it. But if it comes down to any sort of design decision, I'm always gonna be making the decision of what I want to do for that project. You know what I mean? And and so even the one that I made for QuiltCon, it was also sort of just an excuse to make something that I sort of had an idea of making already. So, like if I had known that they were gonna tell me to do more quilting on that um mountain quilt, I still would have done it the same because that's how I wanted to do it.
yeah, yeah.
But
I
it's
said
nice to know the kind of things they're looking for.
I don't think anyone could ask for more quilting on the quilt that's your background, which is quite
That's so much quilting.
one. There's a lot of quilting going on there. Claudia, what about you? Has feedback changed the way you make and sew?
Well, I kind of have this joke going with my smaller quilt group is that I think I must have had the same judge for years at PIQF throwing up their hands saying, "This person cannot square quilt. They don't block it. My God, just do it." You like see the exasperation coming through. That I still to this day have a really hard time getting a quilt square. It just doesn't want to be square for me.
Hmm.
So I kind of chuckle at that. But yeah, I just find that a lot of times judging goes by trends, and sometimes I feel like, well, I'm ahead of the trend, you know? Like if I put my quilts in a traditional show and they have a modern category, they don't really know what's going on in the modern quilt world, the people that are judging quilts, and so they might not like the quilting, and then um, then a couple of years, I might get that quilt in another show and they love the quilting. I mean, I have quilts that have been in 3 or 4 different shows, the same quilt, and you get a diversity of comments.
Absolutely. And of course, Melinda made that comment earlier in the chat about how it very much depends on what else is in the category as well as to kind of what you're comparing with. And if you've just had 3 quilts that have got really bad binding, you might either want to talk about the binding or absolutely not want to talk about the binding. So I suppose that what surrounds it has an impact as well. Andrea, what about you?
From quilt judges, I would have to agree with Melinda's comment about hand stitching the corners, the mitered corners on your binding. I have mo because I quilt samples for my own patterns, I tend to just kind of do an all over pattern and machine apply the binding. But if I think I might want to enter it in a show, I will take the time to do a hand stitched binding. So it does impact some of the techniques I use. It really was a last minute decision when I entered the quilt I'm showing behind me, because you can see I did use an all over pattern, and I know it would have been judged much better if I had done custom quilting. So you kind of have to make those determinations as well. But at the time I just wanted to show off my new design. So I knew I had a very slim chance of getting noticed by the judges for this quilt, but it was a good experience overall.
Yes, and it's a beautiful quilt as well. I know I've definitely when I that first time that I had my quilts judged, they talked about binding. And it does, sometimes there's jokes about judges being the binding police and just always poking holes in people's binding. I was taught on my quilt judge training that It's almost impossible to do your binding perfectly if you machine stitch both sides. And so I am now quite dedicated to hand stitching down the second side, although apparently you don't need to stitch the corners. I suppose it depends which set of judges you've got, but stitching those miters closed is not necessary, according to what I was taught. But now that I have been through that training, each time I'm sewing, I'm kind of critiquing it in my head. So it's kind of not a good thing in many ways, because it's kind of taking some of the joy out of the quilting at the same time. Just before we go over to the deck, I wanted to ask about quilting your own quilts versus having them like professionally quilted, as it were. And I know Cole and Andrew, you both do your own quilting, and Claudia, you do your own quilting, but you also, am I remembering this right? You were also the quilter of Barb Strick's Best in Show QuiltCon quilt. Were you?
No,
Okay, was it one of
no.
her quilts?
Just one of her quilts, which she gave me the most bubbly, uneven quilt in the history of quilts. I quilted it for her, and I had to just keep on quilting, you know, plus it had like wool batting, which of course, you know, it all compounded the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Oh my goodness. So do you have any thoughts about people quilting their own versus sending them
Yeah.
out?
So if you have a quilt at QuiltCon, they will not accept well, they don't accept quilts that use computerized quilting patterns unless you've actually designed that pattern. So that's just a call out because people might not be aware of it. I mean, my quilting's not all that great, but it's passable for shows. And I just like having control as the artist in what I'm making and how I'm quilting it. So, and then also there's obviously cost involved with sending your quilt to a professional quilter. But definitely they should be credited in a show as you know, a part of the maker, the artist, you know, maker of the item. So.
Right. Yeah. Andrea, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on what Claudia was saying about I have seen a shift over the years in the definitions of the categories and how you need to credit the quilter if you did not quilt it yourself, because for many years, you know, there, and I won't even say many years, there is debate over, you know, is the judging on the piecing? Is it judging on the quilting designs on top of the fabric? Or, you know, some combination, obviously, of both would be the ideal. And so many shows, you have to be a collaborative effort for the quilt, which kind of means you need to, both the quilter and the piecer need to be involved from the very beginning and understand that this is a show quilt that we are both going to enter and both going to be recognized for.
Mm. Cole, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with what Andrea is saying. I think nowadays most quilt shows understand that a lot of people have other people quilt their quilts, and there's usually a place to put in the names of the people who quilted it. I quilt all my own quilts, so I've never sent it out to a long armor because I just decided to buy a long arm.
I know
Um,
if you've
and
got the money in the room for it, it's the thing.
yeah, it's in the living room, so you just make
Whoa.
it work. Because I just really wanted it. But I do think, I don't know, sometimes I like to make things completely. Like I like to have control over the whole process.
Mm.
And I know that some people prefer the piecing and want most to the quilting, and I think that's wonderful, obviously, as I'm a long armor, so I'm all for that. But sometimes that does sort of mess with my brain when I think about like entering something in a show where it's like, okay, you pieced it, but then maybe use someone else's pattern, but then someone else quilted it. It makes it really complicated because it's like, is it your quilt? Yes, but like it's partially yours, but also there were so many other people involved. And I feel like that must make it complicated to judge. And I don't think it's wrong, but it feels weird to me because I always want to have, I want to be able to look at the quilt and be like, I did all of that. But that's just my personality, you know. And one thing that I want to say on a slightly different note that I found very interesting as someone who designs patterns is that the quilts that the judges like and the quilts that the people like are not always the same.
Mm.
I had the quilt that got best of show. I put that pattern on my website for like PDF download sale, and I think I've sold two. But I had another pattern that I've sold thousands, and I got that quilt in a show, but it didn't win anything.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, yeah. No, I know. And a lot of shows have that kind of viewers' choice, visitors' choice, people's choice
true, yeah, which
award,
is nice.
yeah, which is always awesome. I know I'd forgotten when I judged the San Mateo County Fair a few months ago, and the judges each get a judge's choice to give a ribbon to. And so I gave mine to a quilt that wasn't very well made at all in a technical sense, and it was like it was a group quilt, and everyone had the same prompt, but I don't think they'd necessarily talk to each other about color or anything, and it was just the most mental wild cacophony, and I absolutely loved it. And it didn't get a ribbon for anything else, I don't think. I don't imagine, but it definitely got my judge's choice, and the other judges were a little bit incredulous that that was my choice, but I just fell in love with it straight away. Okay, well, we've got some images in the deck, so I'm gonna go over and share those now, and we can come back to this. Here we go. So we'll have to see who's oh, here we go. Cole, it's yours. And I can actually give you slide control as well. There you go. So you've got slide control. Cole, do you want to talk us through the slides that you've got in the deck?
Yeah, no, so I think I just put two in there. So this is the one that won Best of Show and second place in piecing at QuiltCon. And so since they were going for unique, this quilt was designed off of a picture that I took when I was into photography. And I designed the pattern and I pieced it and I quilted it. And I also designed some of the prints of some of the fabrics.
Oh, wow. I mean,
And so,
how many fabrics are in this? Because
oh heavens, I don't know.
there are a lot. That's amazing.
There, if you look closely on the left, there's the word joy.
In the
In
in the
the
quilt.
yellow and yellow green,
Oh my goodness, yes.
the
Oh,
fabrics in that word are fabric prints that I designed.
wow.
Slightly different than the other ones, so you can barely see it. That's the name of the quilt.
That's extraordinary. Oh, what a
So
lovely detail.
that's my joy quilt. And then this one,
Oh,
there we
back,
go.
back,
Oh, went too far.
back one, I
There's
think.
a delay. Hang on. I hit the back and it did. Ah! Hopefully it'll. Oh, I put two of them in there. Okay, so that the one with me standing by it, that was my first one at the state fair that I entered. It got viewer's choice, which I was very excited about. And that was actually the first time I ever tried to do paper piecing.
Oh,
It was
really?
very improv-y. I like drew out a picture and then I sort of improved where I wanted to paper piece. And then the one on the right is a Halloween quilt that I designed that that's the pattern I've sold the most of. It got into, I think it was the Paducah show, but it didn't win anything. But I love it. I wouldn't change anything about it.
That is beautiful. And are these patterns on your website as well?
Yeah, except for the Mount Rainier one, because that was my first one and I drew it and then I sewed it and I like threw it away. And then when people saw it, they said, "Oh, what's the pattern?" I was like, "Oh, it's in the trash." Well, after that, I thought, "Oh, I guess I should keep the patterns."
True,
So I don't
true.
have that.
Well, that's amazing. And then the next couple in the deck are mine, I think. And this is from that 2017 quilt show that I mentioned was my first one. And this got a judge's choice, I think it was, or no, honorable mention. That's right. And this is my red and white Lucy. It's a Lucy Boston patchwork of the crosses is the pattern, very traditional English paper pieced pattern. And this quilt has been to a number of lectures with me whenever I talk about English paper piecing. It was a red and white quilt to begin with, only red and white, no pink. And then I washed it and it became a red, white, and pink quilt. Quite remarkably pink in some places. And for ages, I thought that I'd been given a ribbon kind of like as a participation prize and as a sympathy prize for the bleeding and so on that went on, which of course was nonsense. And there were other categories, other quilts in the category that didn't get anything. But this is all part of a talk I give about imposter syndrome, where we sometimes will kind of diminish what we achieve. And then this is much more recently, terrible photo, but this is the San Francisco show this year. And I wanted to include this for two reasons. One is that I was so surprised that this won in something, what was it? Was it third place, I think, in the art quilts category? And this is a triptych I made. The middle is English paper pieced, and then the outers are printed panels. But actually, in this photo, just behind my head, you can see the quilt that won Best in Show at the San Mateo County Fair. And it had been exhibited at the San Francisco Fair, San Francisco show a few months earlier. And I don't remember if it won a ribbon, but it certainly didn't get anywhere near Best in Show at the San Francisco show. So it's just kind of feeding into what we were saying about different things, the scoring differently or getting different responses in different shows. And then, Claudia, this is you. You've got.
Yes, I dug up a really old quilt to show. I think this was one of the first quilts I had judged, and I put a little close up of the quilting, which the quilting makes me cringe because it's pretty crude, skill level wise. But the comment was that it's stuck in my brain all these years was it could benefit from more quilting, and the quilt looks great without any more quilting on it. Plus, I mean, the prints are so busy that you couldn't even see, a lot of the quilting. So that was just a learning experience on what happens when you get your quilt judged. So,
Mhm. I mean, for me, not being very terribly sophisticated in my quilting, the quilting looks amazing and your tension's on and everything is like this
eh,
the highest level I would strive to achieve.
anyway, anyway, thank you. Let's see if there's a lag as I did press the button, or I'll try again.
There we go.
I put this picture in it because I just laughed at the way, I mean, it's such an old picture of myself. I just think it's hilarious, but I look puffed up with pride, which is true because I think that was my first show and it did get a ribbon. So I never sewn a curve in my life. So that's why I stuck that photo in there.
Wow.
So this is the quilt that I did get a nice award for and a little bit of money. And that I told the story about I stuck it in the San Francisco show and got an honorable mention, which was very amusing to me. And I put these two quilts in because I've shown them at 3 or 4 different shows. So I really I got a diversity of comments on the judging. So that was interesting. And also that I tend to make quilts around the same size, and this was part of a series. So when I entered them, I think 4 quilts in the same category, they all were competing against each other, like not against other people, which was kind of funny. So that does happen at smaller shows, and that everyone wanted to tell me the quilt on the left was runner up for almost got best in show, but it did not get best in show. I'm like, why did you have to tell me that? But no, it's on the judging sheets. But I've had these in different shows, and so what was interesting is I'm sorry I don't have a close-up of the quilt on the right, but I tried to be a little bit more freer with the vertical quilting lines because just the theme. I thought that it was a freer quilt, almost like a painting, and it was, very natural. Well, the Houston judges hated that. And they also, well, they didn't hate it, but that's where I got marked down. And you can see when you get like very high marks, they have a matrix that you're getting close to getting a ribbon, right? And then you get, they said the stitching length on both these quilts was uneven, where I got all kinds of praise at the other shows I had, like the quilt on the left in, about how great the quilting was. But also, it did help me recognize that I quilt on a domestic machine. I'm powered by my hands, and that I'm competing against people that have much more sophisticated and better, stitch regulators and all of that. And that's just, that is just the realistic view of the quilting world. I
Yes.
think that's all I have.
That's okay. Let me stop sharing. Yes, I did look at how much it would cost to get a machine with a stitch regulator. And I think it's best just to say a lot. It would cost a lot. So I don't see one of those, unfortunately, in my near future. But just in case anyone's got one, they don't want anymore, just let me know. I'll come get it. It's fine. Okay, well, this has been wonderful, and I've loved having a look at those quilts. Thank you for showing those examples. We're almost at time, so just to finish up, any advice for someone who hasn't yet had a quilt judged about what their next steps should be? Andrea, put you on the spot first of all.
I will repeat my comments from the beginning that I think it is a very valuable experience when you go in with the mindset that this is someone's opinion, you know your work. If you know where the errors are, then you can accept that criticism a little bit easier. And as a kind of a theme throughout our discussion has been kind of knowing the audience, knowing the show atmosphere, and reading the rules carefully to make sure you fit, because a quilt show that has always been very traditional may not appreciate, as Claudia said, those improv, very modern aesthetics.
Absolutely. Cole, what about you?
I say just do it. Just do it and see what happens. I mean, but don't hang your whole life on it.
No.
Like, just, if you haven't done it, just try and just go in with a let's see what happens attitude, and know that your quilt's probably awesome regardless of what happens. But you get some feedback, which is great.
Wonderful. And then Claudia, give you the last word.
Well, I just encourage people to put their quilts, if they belong to a local guild, start there. I mean, that's your tribe, that's your community. Uh, the shows are so much fun. I mean, the ribbons are just icing on the cake. And it's so much fun to share your quilts. And then I would differ just ever so slightly with Andrea. I mean, you don't always know what your flaws are. What you're trying to do is make the best quilt you can at the skill level in which you are. And it is useful. Whether or not you want to, you know, personalize or feel discouraged, you don't want to get your ego, deflated. But I think, sometimes you do learn things that you might not know when you hear another perspective.
Absolutely. And of course, a lot of guilds have like show and tell, which is a much lighter version of showing your work. And then Melinda said in the chat, if you're not yet ready to have your quilt judged, volunteer to assist on judging day, when you can listen without having skin in the game. And certainly that's such a valuable way to get experience of this whole process. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for watching and contributing in the chat and asking questions. It's been fabulous. Thank you to our wonderful panel, who have all been fantastic. And I've put their details in the chat. And if you're watching the recording, it will be in the show notes for you to find out more about them. But I hope everyone, especially our panel, have a wonderful rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.